Welcome, my friend, to another journey through the stars. If you find yourself drawn to the mysteries of the Force and the secrets of the Sith, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community of galactic dreamers. Tonight we venture into the shadows where few have dared to tread. The tale I bring you is one whispered only in the darkest corners of the galaxy, a story of ambition and power that altered the very fabric of the Force itself. In the cold silence of a hidden laboratory deep beneath the gleaming towers of Munir-Linst, a tall, gaunt figure stands motionless. His elongated fingers hover over a shimmering containment field where countless microscopic particles dance in perfect harmony. This is Darth Plagueis, the wise, master of the dark side, keeper of forbidden knowledge that even the ancient Sith lords dared not pursue. The air crackles with energy as Plagueis closes his eyes in deep concentration. The midi-chlorians within the field begin to move with purpose, swirling faster, clustering together against their nature. A smile creeps across his pale, Moan features as something impossible begins to take form within the chamber. A life created not from the union of beings, but from the Force itself. But in that moment of triumph, a shadow falls across the laboratory. A presence approaches, one filled with patience and cunning. One who has been watching, learning, waiting for this precise moment when the secret to immortality lies within reach. Can the power to create life truly belong to a single being? What terrible price must be paid for such mastery over death itself? And what of the rumors that Plagueis discovered the secret to eternal life, only to lose it at the moment of his greatest achievement? Throughout the vast expanse of time, the struggle between knowledge and wisdom has shaped the destinies of countless worlds. Tonight we unravel the enigma of Darth Plagueis, whose obsession with conquering death set in motion events that would one day engulf the entire galaxy in darkness. The boundary between life and death is not meant to be crossed. Yet one Sith Lord dared to breach it, forever altering the balance of the Force and sowing the seeds that would grow into an empire built upon the ashes of the Republic. This is his story. This is the legend of Darth Plagueis. The vast galaxy of our tale spins in the twilight of the Republic era, nearly 5 decades before the fires of the Clone Wars would engulf countless worlds. It was a time of opulent prosperity for some and quiet desperation for many, when the Senate corridors echoed with debates that seemed important but were merely shadows cast by greater powers, moving unseen. I am Kaladin Vos, once a promising scholar within the Jedi Temple archives, now an independent seeker of knowledge that others would prefer remain buried. My journey to uncover the truth about Darth Plagueis began not with grand ambition, but with a simple anomaly in the historical records I was tasked with preserving. The banking world of Munir-Linst rises before me as my small transport descends through layers of security. The planet gleams like a polished gemstone, its surface dominated by pristine white spires that house the intergalactic banking clan. Beneath the mathematical precision of its architecture lies a cold calculation that extends beyond mere credits, for wealth here is merely another form of power. The air on Munir-Linst carries a distinct metallic scent, mingling with the subtle fragrance of the narcoletha blossoms that adorn the entryways of the grand financial houses. My footsteps echo against marble floors polished to mirror perfection as I enter the public archives of the banking clan, my official credentials granting me access to records that few outsiders ever see. "I must warn you," comes a whispered voice beside me. "Some histories are best left undisturbed." The speaker is Jorik Ishar, an elderly Jedi consular whose knowledge of ancient texts once made him renowned throughout the Order. His presence here is not coincidental, I know, but rather the Council's way of monitoring my research without directly interfering. "The disturbances in the Force that you seek to understand," Jorik continues, his weathered face solemn beneath his hood, "they began long before the events you're investigating. The ripples of Plagueis' work continue to spread outward through time itself. The banking clan archives rise around us in towering shelves of data crystals, each containing financial records spanning centuries. But I seek a particular set of transactions, ones that would reveal the movement of resources toward purposes no ledger would openly name. There was a Moon, I say quietly, who served as chairman of the clan nearly 40 years ago. Ego Damask was his public name, but evidence suggests he led a double life shrouded in Sith teachings. Doric's eyes narrow slightly. The Sith were extinct for a millennium before Maul revealed himself on Naboo. The Council would have sensed such a presence. Would they, I ask, retrieving a data crystal from my robes? Or was this Sith Lord skilled enough to hide in plain sight, his Force presence concealed even as he moved among the most powerful beings in the galaxy? The crystal glows softly as I insert it into a reader, projecting the image of a tall, austere Moon in elegant robes. His face bears the characteristic elongated features of his species, yet there is something in his eyes that suggests depths of calculation beyond mere financial acumen. Ego Damask II. I explain, head of Damask Holdings, which operated as a seemingly legitimate investment firm, but channeled vast resources towards secret installations across the Outer Rim, facilities where, I believe, experiments of a most forbidden nature were conducted. As we move through the archives, the temperature seems to drop perceptibly. The pristine white walls of the banking clan repository give way to older sections, where ancient financial records are stored in climate-controlled vaults. Here, the mathematical precision of Moonilinst architecture takes on a more ominous quality, with shadows that seem to linger even under the bright illumination. There are rumors, Jorik says carefully, of a private retreat on the moons of Sojourn, where Damask would host gatherings of political and financial elites, a place where the future of the Republic was quietly shaped by those with no official authority to do so. I nod slowly, and it was there, I believe, that he began to gather acolytes, not Sith apprentices in the traditional sense, but influential beings who would unwittingly serve his greater purpose. Our research extends through the day and into the night, the white spires of Moonilinst now gleaming under the light of 3 pale moons. The pieces of the puzzle begin to form a pattern, yet crucial elements remain elusive. There was someone else, I murmur, studying a financial report that shows an unusual pattern of investments in scientific research facilities. Someone who worked closely with Damask, perhaps initially as a protege, but who may have eventually become something more. Jorik's expression grows troubled. If what you suggest is true, if Plagueis did indeed take an apprentice, then the rule of 2 continues. The apprentice would have eventually confronted the master, and perhaps, I add quietly, taken his place, as the Sith have done for generations. As we prepare to leave the archives, a shadow seems to pass over us, though no physical presence can be detected. For the briefest moment, I sense a cold attention focused upon our work, as if our investigation has disturbed something that prefers to remain hidden. We should proceed with extreme caution. Jorik warns, his voice barely audible. If Plagueis truly mastered the secrets you believe he sought, then we are dealing with knowledge that defies the natural order of the Force itself. The night air of Moonilinst carries a chill that seems to penetrate to the bone as we depart the banking clan complex. Above us, the stars shine with cold indifference, countless worlds unaware that their fates may have been altered by the ambitions of a single Sith Lord whose greatest works were performed in absolute secrecy. Our journey to uncover the truth about Plagueis has only begun, and already I sense that we walk a path fraught with dangers beyond the merely physical, for knowledge, especially that which concerns the deepest mysteries of the Force, carries its own terrible price. The decision to pursue the complete truth about Darth Plagueis solidified within me during the long journey from Moonilinst to Coruscant. The gentle hum of the hyperdrive provided a steady backdrop to my troubled thoughts as I reviewed the fragments of information gathered thus far. "You understand what accepting this quest truly means," Jorik said, his voice cutting through my contemplation. He sat in meditation pose, his eyes closed yet somehow still observing everything. "The Council will not sanction this investigation officially. The very mention of the Sith creates unease among the Masters." "The truth cannot remain buried forever," I replied, organizing the data crystals we had acquired. "If Plagueis did discover methods to manipulate the fundamental nature of the Force, the implications extend beyond Sith and Jedi philosophy. It touches the very essence of life itself." Upon our return to Coruscant, the gleaming ecumenopolis stretched endlessly before us, a testament to thousands of years of civilization built layer upon layer. The Jedi Temple stood amid the urban sprawl, its 5 spires reaching toward the sky like fingers of an outstretched hand. Within the depths of the temple archives, far below the public repositories of knowledge, lay the restricted section where accounts of the Sith and their dark teachings were kept under careful guard. My position as historical archivist granted me access, but I knew that my growing interest in Plagueis had already raised concerns. "Master New monitors all who enter this section," Jorik warned as we passed through several layers of security. "She reports directly to the Council on any unusual research patterns." The air within the restricted section felt heavier, charged with the weight of forbidden knowledge. Holocrons containing Sith teachings recovered over centuries rested in shielded containment fields, their angular shapes a stark contrast to the elegant curves of Jedi holocrons. It was not these known artifacts that I sought, however, but rather the incomplete records that might reveal connections to more recent Sith activity. If Plagueis had indeed operated as Higo Damask while concealing his true nature, there might be evidence of unusual Force events that coincided with his known movements. Hours passed in careful examination of texts and records. My eyes grew weary from scanning ancient scripts and deciphering cryptic references. It was Jorik who eventually discovered the first substantial clue. "Here," he said quietly, holding a small damaged recording crystal that appeared to have been overlooked in the cataloging process. "This contains a partial record of a Jedi investigation from nearly 70 years ago. An anomaly in the Force was detected on Baldemic, but the investigation was apparently abandoned. When activated, the crystal projected a fragmented, holographic report. A Jedi Knight, her image flickering with corruption in the recording, described sensing a convergence in the dark side near an ancient Sith outpost. The investigation was ordered terminated by the Council after the banking clan claimed territorial jurisdiction." "Baldemnik," I murmured. "Rich in cortosis ore, the banking clan established mining operations there decades ago." "Under the direction of Damask Holdings," Jorik added, his expression grim. As we delved deeper into the archives, a pattern began to emerge. Worlds with ancient Sith connections, planets rich in unusual resources, remote locations where strange phenomena had been reported, all showed subtle connections to Higo Damask's business empire. In the deepest repository of the restricted section, behind layers of security that required Jorik's Council override to access, we discovered a small broken fragment of what appeared to be a Sith holocron. Unlike the complete artifacts under containment, this shard had been deemed harmless due to its damaged state. As I carefully lifted the fragment from its storage case, a cold sensation passed through my fingers. The shard pulsed with a faint crimson glow that seemed to intensify with my touch. Suddenly, the archive chamber around us faded, and I found myself standing in a vast laboratory filled with strange equipment. The vision lasted only moments. A tall moon figure stood with his back to me, working methodically at some complex apparatus. Around him, containment fields hummed with energy, each holding what appeared to be living tissue samples from countless species. The moon spoke softly, not to me but to someone else present in the laboratory, his words just beyond my ability to comprehend. As quickly as it came, the vision vanished, leaving me gasping and disoriented in the archive chamber. The holocron fragment had grown cold in my hand, its glow now extinguished. "What did you see?" Jorik asked urgently, his hand on my shoulder steadying me. "His laboratory," I whispered. Plagueis was experimenting with living matter, countless specimens, manipulating them somehow through the Force. Jorik's expression darkened. "Then it is as I feared. He was pursuing knowledge of midi-chlorian manipulation, attempting to influence life at its most fundamental level." The broken holocron fragment was carefully returned to its container, but the vision it had granted could not be so easily set aside. We had found the first concrete evidence of Plagueis' true work, and with it came the responsibility to uncover the full extent of his experiments. As we departed the archives that night, the stars visible through Coruscant's skylane seemed dimmer somehow, as if the very knowledge we now carried cast a shadow on the light of the galaxy. Our quest had truly begun, and there would be no turning back from the dark truths that awaited. The coordinates from the Jedi archives led us to the remote world of Baldenic, its surface largely comprised of jagged cliffs and turbulent seas. From orbit, the banking clan mining operations were clearly visible, industrial scars upon the otherwise untamed landscape. But we did not seek the active facilities. Our interest lay in an abandoned site mentioned briefly in the fragmentary records. Our small scout vessel approached the planet under the guise of a routine archaeological survey. The falsified permits arranged through contacts Jorik had cultivated during his years of service to the Republic. The landing was rough, buffeted by the strong winds that perpetually swept across the coastal regions. "The native Kome avoid this area entirely," I noted as we disembarked. "Local legends speak of voices in the wind that drive listeners to madness." Jorik nodded grimly. "Such tales often surround places strong with the dark side of the Force." The abandoned mining facility stood partially reclaimed by the elements, its durasteel structures corroded by the salt-laden air. Official records indicated it had been deemed unprofitable and shuttered decades ago. But as we cautiously entered the main complex, it became evident that the facility's true purpose had never been mining at all. Beyond the perfunctory processing equipment near the entrance lay a laboratory far more sophisticated than anything needed for mineral extraction. Much of the technology had been removed, but the specialized containment systems embedded in the walls could not be so easily dismantled. "These are midi-chlorian isolation chambers," Jorik said quietly, running his hand along the distinctive circular housings. "I have seen similar designs in ancient Jedi texts discussing the nature of the living force. But never at this scale," I added, taking in the vast array that filled the chamber. This facility could process thousands of samples simultaneously. In what appeared to be the central research area, we discovered a damaged data terminal. While most of its contents had been wiped clean, the backup systems retained fragmentary logs that painted a disturbing picture of the work conducted here. The records spoke of Subject Zero, a being with an unusually high midi-chlorian count who provided baseline samples for comparative analysis. Following this were references to attempted midi-chlorian augmentation in various species, with clinical descriptions of failures that turned my stomach. Beings whose cells had ruptured as their midi-chlorians multiplied uncontrollably, others whose connection to the Force had been severed entirely, leaving them as hollow shells. "These experiments," Jorik whispered, his voice strained, "they violate everything the Force represents. Life is not meant to be engineered in this manner." A separate section of the laboratory contained what appeared to be medical facilities far beyond what any mining operation would require. Surgical suites with specialized equipment designed for precision work at the cellular level stood in pristine condition despite the years of abandonment. He was not merely studying midi-chlorians, I realized with growing horror. Plagueis was attempting to create them, to artificially induce force sensitivity where none existed naturally. As we delved deeper into the facility, we discovered a heavily secured chamber that had been sealed with both mechanical locks and what appeared to be Sith alchemical wards. It took our combined skills several hours to bypass these protections, and what we found within justified such extraordinary measures. The chamber was small, containing only a single stasis pod connected to monitoring equipment that still functioned on emergency power. Within the pod floated what appeared to be a human embryo suspended in development for what the logs suggested had been nearly 50 years. "This is impossible," Jorik breathed, studying the readouts. "The midi-chlorian count in this embryo exceeds anything recorded in the archives, save perhaps for a handful of legendary Jedi." More disturbing still were the notes in Plagueis' precise handwriting, detailing how this embryo had been conceived not through natural reproduction, but through direct manipulation of midi-chlorians, compelled to coalesce into a living form through the power of the dark side. "He was attempting to create life directly from the Force itself," I said, the implication sending a chill through me despite the humid air of the laboratory. "To become, in essence, a god." The logs indicated that this experiment had been deemed partially successful but ultimately abandoned when the embryo proved unstable. Yet references to a more promising approach suggested that Plagueis had not abandoned his goal, merely changed his methodology. As we prepared to leave with the data we had recovered, a subtle shift in the atmosphere alerted us to another presence. Nothing visible manifested, but both Jorik and I sensed it, a cold attention focused upon our activities. "We are being watched," Jorik said softly, his hand moving to his lightsaber. The feeling passed as suddenly as it had arrived, but it left behind a lingering unease. Someone, or something, was monitoring our investigation, though whether it was a security system left by Plagueis or something more sinister remained unclear. Our departure from Baldemnik was hastened by the approach of a banking clan security vessel, responding perhaps to some silent alarm we had triggered. As our ship broke atmosphere, I could not shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of Plagueis' work. The data recovered from the facility presented a troubling puzzle. The timestamps indicated that Plagueis had abandoned these particular experiments decades ago, suggesting that they represented only early stages in his research. What heights of terrible knowledge had he reached in the years since? More pressing still was the question of what had happened to the fruits of his later research. If Plagueis had truly discovered the secret to creating life through the Force, such knowledge represented power beyond measure. In the wrong hands, it could upset the very balance of the galaxy. As our ship entered hyperspace, the stars streaking into blue lines around us, I pondered the growing evidence that Plagueis' ultimate goal had been the secret of immortality itself. Not merely the extension of life, but true mastery over death, the final limitation that even the most powerful Force users could not overcome. What terrible price had the galaxy already paid for his ambition, and what greater cost might still be exacted? Our findings from Baldemnik created ripples of concern when carefully shared with select members of the Jedi Council. Master Yoda's ears drooped visibly as he absorbed the implications of Plagueis' experiments, while Mace Windu's expression hardened into stone. "Disturbing this information is," Yoda said finally, "but incomplete. Your picture remains." "With respect, Masters," I ventured, "the evidence clearly points to Sith activity of the most dangerous kind. If Plagueis was manipulating midi-chlorians to create life artificially, the implications extend to the very foundations of the Force itself." Windu exchanged a glance with Yoda before responding. "The banking clan's involvement suggests a more mundane explanation. Damask Holdings has always sought technological advantages to maintain their financial dominance. These experiments, while ethically reprehensible, may have been simply an attempt to develop medical technologies with commercial applications. This interpretation struck me as deliberately obtuse, yet it reflected the Council's long-standing reluctance to acknowledge the continuing Sith threat. After centuries without confirmed Sith activity, many Jedi found it easier to attribute darkness to more familiar evils like greed and ambition. The facility was abandoned decades ago, Kiade Mundi added. Whatever research Damask pursued there clearly failed to yield the results he sought. The matter appears to be of historical interest only. I left the council chamber with a sense of profound unease. Their dismissal of the threat felt not merely complacent, but willfully blind. Jorek, who had remained silent during the meeting, shared my concerns. "They see what they wish to see," he said as we walked the temple corridors. "It is easier to believe that Plagueis was merely a wealthy moon with unethical research practices than to accept that the Sith have operated undetected for generations." The Council did, however, grant us permission to continue our historical research, viewing it as harmless academic work that might yield insights into ancient Force techniques. This limited authorization would prove invaluable in the days ahead. Our investigation shifted to the financial aspects of Damask Holdings. If Plagueis had abandoned his work on Baldemnik, it was not because he had given up his goals, but because he had found more promising avenues. By tracing the flow of credits, we might discover where those new experiments had taken place. The banking clan's records were meticulously maintained but deliberately obscured through a labyrinth of shell companies and proxy investments. What emerged after weeks of careful analysis was a picture that seemed to support the Council's mundane interpretation. Higo Damask had indeed invested heavily in medical research, particularly in technologies related to life extension and cellular regeneration. The profits from these investments had been substantial, fueling the continued expansion of Damask Holdings until it controlled significant portions of the galaxy's financial infrastructure. "Perhaps we have been overthinking this matter," Jorek suggested, as we reviewed our findings in my modest temple quarters. Munes are known for their longevity, often living well beyond 200 standard years. It would be natural for Damask to have a personal interest in technologies that might extend his life even further. The pattern of investments showed a businessman obsessed with control and personal gain, using his wealth to accumulate more wealth and influence. Nothing in the financial records explicitly contradicted the image of Damask as simply an ambitious, if ruthless, financier. It would be a perfect cover, I countered. What better way for a Sith Lord to hide his true nature than behind the facade of predictable greed? The dark side has always fed on ambition and the desire for power. But even I had to admit that our evidence of Sith involvement remained circumstantial. The connection between Higo Damask and Darth Plagueis rested primarily on the holocron vision and the nature of the experiments on Baldemnik, neither of which would convince skeptics on the Council. As I sat late that night reviewing our accumulated data, a shadow fell across my desk. Looking up, I expected to see Jorek, but instead found only empty air and the strange sensation of being observed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop momentarily, and for an instant I thought I detected a presence in the Force, calculating and cold, before it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The experience left me shaken. If Plagueis or his legacy still existed in some form, our investigation might have drawn unwanted attention. Yet the rational part of my mind suggested a simpler explanation. Stress and lack of sleep were causing me to imagine threats where none existed. In the days that followed, I found myself accepting the safer conclusion, if only temporarily. Higo Damask had been an unethical businessman whose experiments crossed moral boundaries but fell short of true Sith alchemy. His interest in midichlorians had been merely an extension of his desire for longer life and greater wealth, not the pursuit of dark side mastery. This conclusion brought a certain comfort. It aligned with the Council's assessment and offered a contained threat that belonged safely in the past. The Moon financier had died years ago, his questionable research apparently dying with him. But in the quiet moments between research and rest, doubt lingered. The vision from the holocron fragment could not be so easily dismissed. And if Plagueis had truly been a Sith master, trained in the arts of deception and manipulation, would he not have ensured that the most obvious evidence pointed to entirely mundane motivations? The simplest explanation felt increasingly like a convenient fiction, one that I had briefly accepted not because it was true, but because the alternative was too disturbing to contemplate. The comfortable fiction of Higo Damask as merely an unethical businessman crumbled during a chance encounter in the Senate district of Coruscant. While pursuing records of Damask's political connections, I found myself in conversation with an elderly Toydarian who had once served as a senatorial aide during the financial crisis that had gripped the Chomel sector decades earlier. "Damask," the Toydarian muttered, his wings beating nervously at the mention of the name. He was no ordinary banker. Those who opposed his policies suffered strange accidents. Some said he could see the future, predict market movements before they happened. Others believed he could influence thoughts, make you agree to terms your mind rejected moments before. This testimony, while anecdotal, rekindled my suspicions. Force, persuasion, and precognition were well-documented abilities, though using them for financial and political manipulation would violate every principle the Jedi held sacred. Jorik and I decided to pursue a new line of investigation, focusing not on Damask's public activities, but on his personal retreats. The records mentioned a private estate on Sojourn, a moon in the Chomel sector where Damask had hosted exclusive gatherings of political and financial elites. Securing transport to Sojourn proved challenging. The moon remained private property of the banking clan, with access strictly controlled. Through careful manipulation of our Jedi credentials and research authorizations, we managed to obtain permission for a brief archaeological survey, allegedly focused on pre-Republic ruins in the vicinity of the estate. Sojourn greeted us with breathtaking natural beauty. Pristine forests surrounded a vast lake of remarkable clarity, reflecting the gas giant that dominated the sky. The Damask estate occupied a prime position overlooking the water, its architecture blending seamlessly with the natural environment while still projecting an unmistakable aura of power and wealth. "This place feels wrong," Jorik whispered as we approached. Though abandoned for years, the grounds remained immaculately maintained by service droids. The force is muted here, as if deliberately obscured. Inside the main residence, we found spaces designed for luxury and comfort, with accommodations suited to dozens of guests from various species. Nothing overtly suggested Sith occupation until we discovered a concealed turbo lift hidden behind a bookcase in what appeared to be Damask's private study. The mechanism remained functional, carrying us deep beneath the estate into a network of chambers shielded by meters of solid rock. Unlike the welcoming spaces above, these rooms were Spartan and clinical, clearly designed for work rather than leisure. Another laboratory I observed, taking in the familiar configuration of research equipment. But unlike the abandoned facility on Baldemnik, this installation appeared more refined, focused on quality rather than quantity. Instead of banks of containment units, there were only a few, each far more sophisticated than those we had previously encountered. The central chamber housed a single medical pod, designed for a moon occupant and connected to equipment whose purpose we could only partially determine. Monitoring systems for midi-chlorian activity were evident, but they were integrated with other technologies that appeared to focus on cellular regeneration and neural mapping. He was experimenting on himself, Jorik realized, examining the diagnostic readouts still stored in the system's memory, attempting to increase his own midi-chlorian count through some form of self-infusion. The data logs contained references to conscious control of cellular processes and direct force influence over biological functions, suggesting that Plagueis had progressed far beyond crude physical manipulation of midi-chlorians to more subtle techniques. Most disturbing were entries describing successful instances of revitalization, where damaged or dying tissue had been completely restored through application of the Force. The clinical language could not disguise the extraordinary implication. Plagueis had discovered methods to heal injuries and perhaps even prevent death through direct midi-chlorian manipulation. In a secondary chamber, we discovered what appeared to be meditation space, unlike any I had seen in Jedi teaching. The walls were inscribed with ancient Sith glyphs, and the floor featured a complex pattern that seemed designed to focus and amplify dark side energies. "This is where he would commune with the dark side," Jarek said softly, hesitant to step fully into the room, seeking wisdom from the accumulated knowledge of the Sith who came before him. As I cautiously entered the meditation chamber, the air seemed to thicken around me. The force felt strange here, neither light nor dark, but somehow distorted, as if fundamental natural laws had been repeatedly bent and never quite returned to their proper shape. Settling into a meditative posture in the center of the room, I opened myself cautiously to the force, seeking understanding rather than power. The sensation that followed defied easy description. Images flooded my mind, stars being born and dying, cells dividing and mutating, the endless cycle of life and death playing out from microscopic to cosmic scales. Through it all ran a current of fierce determination, a refusal to accept the natural order. I sensed Plagueis' presence, not as a ghost but as an imprint left upon the Force itself, his obsession with transcending mortality embedded in the very walls around me. When I emerged from the trance, Jarek was watching me with concern. "You were in that state for nearly 2 hours," he said. "Your life signs fluctuated in ways I've never witnessed before." The experience had left me with a profound realization. Plagueis had not merely sought to extend his life through conventional means or even through traditional Sith techniques. He had pursued something far more fundamental, the ability to directly control the midi-chlorians that connected all living things to the Force. In the depths of the laboratory, we discovered one final chamber, sealed more securely than all the others. Inside was not more equipment but a collection of ancient texts and artifacts, some recognizably Sith in origin, others from traditions so obscure that even Jarek's extensive knowledge could not identify them. Among these was a partial manuscript written in Plagueis' own hand, detailing his understanding of what he termed the ultimate power. The text described not the creation of life, as we had initially suspected, but something even more profound, the ability to prevent death itself. According to Plagueis' writings, he had progressed beyond merely healing injuries to actually preventing the natural death of cells. In clinical trials, he claimed to have kept specimens alive indefinitely, their natural aging processes completely halted through continuous midi-chlorian manipulation. The final pages of the manuscript suggested that Plagueis had begun training an apprentice in these techniques, though the individual was referred to only as the student with no name or species identified. As we prepared to depart sojourn with our discoveries, the peaceful beauty of the moon took on a sinister aspect. The tranquil waters of the lake now seemed to hide unfathomable depths, much like the Sith Lord who had once made this place his sanctuary. The stars wheeled slowly overhead as our ship lifted from the surface, their eternal light a stark contrast to the unnatural immortality that Plagueis had pursued with such single-minded determination. Our findings from sojourn necessitated careful consideration away from the watchful eyes of both the Jedi Council and whatever unseen presence seemed to shadow our investigation. We retreated to the ancient Jedi outpost on Ossus, a world whose libraries had once housed the greatest collection of Force knowledge in the galaxy before their destruction thousands of years ago. The ruins provided both seclusion and a natural Force nexus, where we could safely examine the materials recovered from Plagueis' hidden laboratory. For 3 days we immersed ourselves in the Sith Lord's writings, piecing together his philosophical approach to immortality. His understanding of the Force was unprecedented, Jarek admitted reluctantly as we studied by the light of a single lamp. Plagueis rejected the traditional Sith pursuit of physical power in favor of something far more subtle. According to the manuscripts, Plagueis had concluded that previous Sith had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the Force. They sought to bend it to their will through passion and emotion. But Plagueis believed the true path to mastery lay in understanding its most fundamental component, the midi-chlorians that connected all living things to the cosmic energy field. He viewed the Force not as a mystical energy to be commanded, I observed, but as a biological phenomenon to be understood and manipulated at its cellular level. The most significant revelation came on the morning of the fourth day, when we decoded a section of text written in an ancient Sith cipher. The passage described what Plagueis called his greatest breakthrough, achieved after decades of experimentation. "I have succeeded where all others have failed," the translation read. "Not through ritual or alchemy, but through direct communion with the midi-chlorians themselves. They can be compelled not merely to heal, but to create. Through proper application of the dark side, life itself can be initiated within the Force, independent of natural reproduction." The implications stunned us into silence. Plagueis claimed to have discovered how to create life directly through the Force, bypassing the natural processes of reproduction entirely. "If this is true," Jorik said finally, his voice unsteady, "then Plagueis achieved what many would consider godlike power. The ability to create life is the fundamental mystery of existence." More disturbing still were the notes that followed, detailing an experiment conducted in the final years of Plagueis's known life. He described focusing the full power of his will upon the midi-chlorians, compelling them to coalesce and form a new consciousness within the Force itself. "The vergence takes form," one entry read. "Slowly, but with growing certainty. The midi-chlorians respond to my directive, gathering to my purpose. A consciousness forms within the cosmic Force, one that will eventually seek physical form. When it does, it shall be a being of unprecedented power, the living embodiment of the Force itself." This passage caused Jorik visible distress. "A vergence in the Force," he whispered, "created artificially through Sith technique. Such a thing should not be possible." Yet the clinical precision of Plagueis's notes left little room for doubt. He had meticulously documented the process, recording midi-chlorian measurements and Force resonance patterns that corresponded with known phenomena. Either he had achieved what he claimed, or he had convinced himself of success through self-deception. As we delved deeper into the manuscripts, another pattern emerged. Plagueis's later writings showed increasing paranoia regarding his apprentice, referred to only as the student or occasionally the shadow. "He grows too quickly in knowledge," one entry noted. "His questions probe the limits of what I have revealed, seeking always the final secrets I have withheld. His ambition is as vast as the dark between stars, his patience as deep as the ancient oceans of Menon. I have taught him much, perhaps too much, yet I sense he conceals his true progress from my awareness." The timing of these entries corresponded with Plagueis's increasing public visibility as he go Damask, particularly his involvement in negotiations between the Trade Federation and the outlying systems that would eventually form the separatist movement. He was positioning himself as a power broker, I realized, using his financial influence to shape galactic politics while simultaneously pursuing immortality through the Force. The final entries in the manuscript dated from approximately 10 years ago, shortly before Higo Damask's reported death. They contained references to a grand plan nearing fruition and the necessity of guiding certain political developments on Naboo. "The young queen proves malleable," one such entry read. "Her senator more so, his ambition a beacon in the Force. Through him much can be accomplished with subtle guidance. The student sees only the political advantage, blind to the greater purpose these manipulations serve in the cosmic design." As I read these words aloud, Jorik's expression transformed from concentration to shock. "Naboo," he said. The senator from Naboo at that time was Palpatine, who later became Supreme Chancellor following the vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum. The connection struck me with the force of revelation, a vote prompted by the Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo, I added. The very crisis that Plagueis seems to have been orchestrating from behind the scenes. We sat in stunned silence as the implications unfolded before us. If Plagueis had been manipulating political events at such a high level, using the Trade Federation crisis as part of some greater scheme, then his influence extended far beyond what even we had suspected. More troubling still was the identity of Plagueis' apprentice, the Shadow, whose ambition concerned even his Sith master. The timing of events and the connection to Naboo politics suggested possibilities too disturbing to voice aloud. As if responding to our realization, the force around us seemed to darken. The ruins of Orsus, peaceful for thousands of years, suddenly felt oppressive and watchful. Both Jorik and I sensed it simultaneously, a cold attention focused upon our work with an intensity that could not be natural. "We need to leave," Jorik said quietly, already gathering the manuscripts, immediately. As we hastily packed our findings, a wind rose from nowhere, whistling through the ancient stones with a sound almost like distant laughter. The light of our lamp flickered and nearly died, plunging the chamber into momentary darkness before stabilizing again. The message was unmistakable. We were no longer investigating history, but had stumbled upon secrets that remained very much alive in the present. Secrets that someone or something did not wish brought into the light. Our small ship departed Orsus with urgency bordering on desperation, accelerating to hyperspace with a sense that unseen eyes tracked our every movement across the stars. The revelation about Naboo created a fundamental shift in our understanding of Plagueis' work. What we had initially perceived as isolated scientific experiments now appeared to be threads in a vast tapestry of manipulation extending across decades of galactic history. With this new perspective, we began to meticulously connect events separated by years and parsecs, searching for the pattern that would reveal the full scope of the Sith Lord's grand design. In the secure confines of an abandoned Republic monitoring station in the Rishi Maze, we laid out a comprehensive timeline, correlating Plagueis' known movements as he go Damask with significant political developments throughout the Republic. "The pattern is unmistakable once you know to look for it," I said, gesturing to the holographic display where points of data interconnected in an intricate web. Financial crises, political upheavals, even certain technological developments all bear his fingerprints. Jorik studied the timeline with growing concern. The Stark hyperspace war, the Yinkori uprising, the destabilization of the Outer Rim banking sector, all served to gradually weaken Republic authority while appearing unconnected. Most disturbing was the acceleration of events following the Naboo crisis. The emergence of the separatist movement, the discovery of the clone army on Kamino, and the outbreak of the Clone Wars all followed a pattern consistent with long-term Sith manipulation. If Plagueis was orchestrating these events, Jorik said carefully, and if he had indeed taken an apprentice as the rule of two demands, then that apprentice would have continued his work after his death. The implication hung in the air between us, too dangerous to voice explicitly. The idea that a Sith Lord might currently occupy a position of significant power within the Republic was not merely alarming but potentially treasonous to suggest without irrefutable evidence. Our investigation took on a new dimension as we began to research the circumstances of Higo Damask's reported death. According to official banking clan records, he had died of natural causes at his Coruscant residence the night before the election of Chancellor Palpatine, following a reception he had hosted for political elites. Too convenient, I noted. The timing aligns perfectly with the culmination of the Naboo crisis and the political ascension of Senator Palpatine to the chancellorship. Securing access to the sealed medical records required careful application of both slicing techniques and judicious use of Jedi authority. What we discovered defied conventional explanation. The cause of death was recorded as heart failure, Jorek said, studying the report. But the examining medical droid noted severe cellular degradation throughout the body, as if every cell had simultaneously begun to break down. Consistent with a sudden withdrawal of force influence at the cellular level, I suggested. If Plagueis was indeed maintaining his life through midi-chlorian manipulation, as his notes suggest, then a sufficiently powerful disruption of that process would cause precisely this kind of systemic failure. The question remained, had Plagueis truly died that night, or had he somehow cheated death, as he had long sought to do? And if he had died, was it natural failure of his techniques, or the work of his apprentice following Sith tradition? To answer these questions, we needed to understand the full extent of Plagueis' power over life and death. Our search led us to Cato Nemoidia, where Higo Damask had maintained a private estate separate from his more public retreat on Sojourn. According to financial records, this property had continued to receive maintenance funding through a complex series of automated trusts long after his reported death. The estate was situated within one of the famous bridge cities, suspended between massive rock arches and shrouded in perpetual mist. Security remained active but followed predictable patterns that allowed us to infiltrate the grounds during a scheduled maintenance cycle. Unlike the laboratory on Sojourn, this facility appeared designed for practical application rather than experimentation. The central chamber housed a sophisticated medical suite built around a regeneration tank of unique design. Surrounding it were recording devices and monitoring systems focused on capturing and analyzing force phenomena. This was not for research, Jorek observed. This was for implementation of techniques already perfected. The computer systems, though secured, yielded to Jorek's careful slicing. The data they contained documented hundreds of cases where Plagueis had apparently used his mastery of midi-chlorian manipulation to affect living beings in profound ways. Some subjects had been healed of incurable conditions. Others had experienced dramatic extension of their natural lifespans. Most disturbing were cases where beings clinically dead for minutes or even hours had been revitalized through direct force intervention. He achieved it, I whispered, scrolling through the clinical data. Plagueis truly found the power to prevent death, just as the Sith legend claimed. Yet the records also revealed the limitations of this power. The revitalization process required tremendous concentration and energy, leaving Plagueis physically depleted for days afterward. Moreover, it could not be self-applied during unconsciousness or after death, creating the paradoxical situation where he could save others but would require assistance to save himself. This explains his interest in creating a Force Vergence, Jorek said. A being powerful enough in the Force to revitalize him should his own techniques fail. The final records in the system dated from the very day of Plagueis' reported death. They contained only a single entry, apparently dictated rather than typed. The apprentice suspects nothing. Tonight, as the Republic transitions to new leadership, so too shall the grand plan enter its final phase. Immortality awaits not merely in continued existence, but in the eternal impact of work well conceived. As we contemplated this cryptic message, a secondary security system activated without warning. Holoprojectors throughout the chamber flickered to life, projecting the image of a tall, mown figure in formal banking clan attire. Unauthorized access detected, the hologram announced in a cultured voice. Identity confirmation required. Though clearly an automated security measure rather than a true consciousness, the presence of Plagueis' image was nevertheless unsettling. The hologram waited expectantly for credentials we could not provide, its lifeless eyes seeming to look through us with calculating intelligence. "We should leave," Jorek urged quietly. "This system may alert others to our presence." As we turned to depart, the hologram spoke again, this time in a lower tone that seemed addressed to no one in particular. Remember, the power over death is not found in desperate preservation of the self, but in the calculated preservation of one's work. True immortality lies in legacy, in the careful orchestration of events that continue to unfold long after the orchestrator has departed the stage. The words followed us as we made our hurried escape from the estate, the automated defenses now fully activated. They echoed in my mind during our journey back to Republic space, carrying implications too vast to immediately comprehend. Plagueis had sought physical immortality through the Force. That much was clear. But he had also prepared for the possibility of failure by ensuring that his greater plans would continue regardless of his personal survival. The grand plan he referenced would outlive him, guided perhaps by the apprentice whose ambition had concerned him in his final days. If that apprentice now operated at the highest levels of the Republic, then Plagueis had achieved a form of immortality more insidious than mere physical persistence. His vision lived on, unfolding according to designs laid decades in advance, while the galaxy remained blind to the manipulation. The weight of our discoveries grew heavier with each passing day. If our suspicions were correct, the implications extended beyond historical curiosity to present an active threat to the Republic and the Jedi Order. We needed counsel from those with the wisdom to interpret what we had found, yet caution dictated that we could not simply present our evidence to the Jedi Council, where political considerations might interfere with objective assessment. Instead, we sought out individuals whose knowledge of the Force transcended orthodox teachings, beginning with Master Terra Sinube, whose long life and scholarly approach to Jedi history made him an invaluable resource. We met in the Room of 1,000 Fountains, where the constant flow of water would help mask our conversation from potential eavesdropping. Plagueis, the elderly Kosian master, mused, his long proboscis quivering slightly as he considered the name. Not in the standard Sith genealogies, but there are whispers in ancient texts of a lineage that maintained absolute secrecy, operating through proxies and disguises. When presented with our evidence of midi-chlorian manipulation, Sinube neither dismissed it nor expressed shock, but nodded slowly, as if confirming long-held suspicions. The ancient Jedi texts speak of similar techniques, though never pursued to such extremes, he explained. The living Force can indeed influence cellular processes. Healing trances and life extensions are but rudimentary applications of this principle. What you describe is the same fundamental concept but twisted toward unnatural ends. His assessment of Plagueis' ability to create life through the Force was more cautious. Possible perhaps, but at tremendous cost. The Force seeks balance. To create life through artificial means would require a counterbalancing death or suffering elsewhere in the cosmic equation. From Sinube we sought out Jocasta Nu, not in her official capacity as chief librarian, but in the privacy of her personal study. Though initially skeptical, her expression grew grave as we presented the timeline correlating Plagueis' activities with galactic events. "I have served the archives for decades," she said quietly, "and in that time, I have noted certain peculiarities in the historical record, information that changes subtly between viewings. Records that vanish without explanation, security breaches that leave no trace except for missing data." She produced from a hidden compartment a small journal filled with meticulous notations. "I have tracked these anomalies out of professional curiosity. They cluster around precisely the events and periods you have identified in your timeline. The possibility that someone had been systematically altering Jedi records to obscure connections to Sith manipulation was deeply troubling. If the archives could not be trusted, the Order's very understanding of recent history might be compromised. Our third consultation took us far from Coruscant to the remote world of Kifu, where we sought audience with Jedi Master Tholm. Unlike many in the Order, Tholm operated frequently beyond the Council's direct oversight, maintaining a network of contacts throughout the galaxy's shadowy underworld. The criminal syndicates have been manipulated for decades, Tholm confirmed after reviewing our findings. The Black Sun, the Hutt cartels, even the Pike Syndicate, all have experienced mysterious shifts in leadership and policy that aligned with Republic political developments. Someone has been playing a very long game, using the underworld as pawns on a Decheric board. He provided us with data on unexplained assassinations and apparent accidents that had eliminated key criminal leaders, always with the result of redirecting syndicate activities in ways that ultimately served the destabilization of Republic authority. Most revealing, Tholm added, is what happened after Damask's death. Rather than collapsing, the pattern of manipulation continued seamlessly, suggesting that control had transferred to another player who understood the strategy perfectly. Our final and perhaps most valuable insight came from an unexpected quarter. On Jorik's suggestion, we traveled to Dagobah, a world strong with the living force but untouched by civilization. There in the tangled swamps, we conducted a rare Jedi ritual of communal meditation, opening ourselves fully to the Force's guidance. The experience defied conventional description. Immersed in the Force's currents, we perceived echoes of Plagueis' work rippling through time, like concentric circles spreading from a stone cast into still water. His manipulation of midi-chlorians had left scars in the fabric of the Force itself, disturbances that continued to influence the present. More disturbing was the sensation of a vast shadow spreading across the galaxy, a darkness not confined to a single source but permeating the very structures of Republic governance. The Force showed us not specific individuals but patterns of influence, threads of control extending from a central nexus of dark side energy. When we emerged from the meditation, hours had passed, though it felt like mere moments. Jorik's expression reflected the same grave understanding that I felt. The dark side has been ascendant for longer than any of us realized, he said softly, the swamp mists curling around us. Plagueis and his apprentice, whoever they may be, have orchestrated a grand deception spanning generations. The Jedi have been reactive, addressing symptoms while the true disease spreads undetected. As we compared the insights gathered from our various sources, a cohesive picture began to form. Plagueis had indeed mastered unprecedented control over life and death through midi-chlorian manipulation. He had used this knowledge not merely for personal immortality, but as part of a multi-generational scheme to undermine the Republic and the Jedi from within. Most critically, his work appeared to continue through an apprentice whose identity remained hidden but whose influence extended to the highest levels of Republic governance. The grand plan referenced in Plagueis' final recorded words was unfolding even now, accelerating towards some culmination we could only begin to imagine. We must take our findings to the full council, Jorik insisted, as we prepared to leave Dagobah. The evidence may be circumstantial, but the pattern is too clear to ignore. If a Sith Lord truly operates within the Republic leadership, every moment of delay brings us closer to disaster. I agreed, though with reservation. The Council has been resistant to such warnings before. We must present our case carefully, focusing on verifiable facts rather than speculation, no matter how well-founded. As our ship lifted through Dagobah's thick atmosphere, the weight of responsibility settled upon us. We had begun this journey seeking historical knowledge, but now found ourselves holding information that might determine the fate of the galaxy itself. The stars of hyperspace stretched around our vessel, their light seemingly dimmer than before, as if reflecting the shadow we had glimpsed spreading across the Republic. Time was running short, and the consequences of failure too terrible to contemplate. Our return to Coruscant coincided with a rare convergence of the full Jedi Council, summoned to address the escalating crisis in the Outer Rim territories. The war against the Separatists had entered a critical phase, with General Grievous launching bold strikes against key Republic positions, while Count Dooku orchestrated political discord from the shadows. Jorik secured us an audience through his connections with Master Windu, though we were allotted only a brief window between strategic consultations. The timing seemed both fortunate and concerning, as many council members participated via hologram from distant battlefields, their attention divided by immediate military concerns. The council chamber, circular and serene, felt somehow smaller than I remembered as we stood at its center, surrounded by the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. Master Yoda's penetrating gaze settled on us with particular intensity, as if he sensed the gravity of our findings before we spoke. Masters, Jorik began, we come before you with information that may fundamentally alter our understanding of the Sith threat and the current conflict. Our presentation was meticulously organized, beginning with the verifiable facts about Higo Damask's scientific research and financial activities, then progressing to the evidence of his Sith identity as Darth Plagueis. We carefully outlined the connection between his political manipulations and the current galactic crisis, presenting the timeline that revealed decades of orchestrated events leading to the Clone Wars. Throughout our explanation, I sensed a growing unease among the council members. Some, like Ki-Adi-Mundi, displayed open skepticism, while others, particularly Yoda and Windu, listened with grave attention. Difficult to accept, these conclusions are, Yoda said, when we had finished. Imply they do that blind we have been to Sith manipulation for generations. With respect, Master Yoda, I responded. The evidence suggests that this blindness was deliberately cultivated. Plagueis operated with extraordinary patience and subtlety, using his position within the banking clan to influence events without revealing his true nature. Master Windu leaned forward, his expression stern. You have presented compelling evidence regarding Darth Plagueis and his historical activities. What remains speculative is the identity of his apprentice and the suggestion that this individual continues to operate at the highest levels of the Republic. This was the most dangerous aspect of our theory, and we had debated extensively how much to reveal. Jorik took the lead, his voice careful and measured. The timing of Plagueis' death coincides precisely with Chancellor Palpatine's rise to power. The transfer of influence from banking clan financial manipulation to direct political control through the chancellorship represents a logical evolution of Sith strategy. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Several council members exchanged troubled glances, while others appeared almost offended by the suggestion. Chancellor Palpatine has been granted extensive emergency powers by the Senate, Jorik continued. Powers that have systematically undermined the traditional checks and balances of the Republic. Each crisis that has expanded his authority follows patterns consistent with the manipulations documented in Plagueis' records. Master Windu's expression darkened. You are suggesting that Chancellor Palpatine himself may be the Sith apprentice we have sought. We present only the evidence, Master Windu, I replied carefully. The pattern of influence continues unbroken from Plagueis to the present and centers now on the office of the Chancellor. Whether Palpatine himself is complicit, manipulated, or indeed the apprentice in question, we cannot state with certainty. The debate that followed was intense but ultimately inconclusive. The council remained divided, with some members viewing our evidence as compelling while others considered it circumstantial. The political implications of investigating the Supreme Chancellor during wartime presented practical challenges that could not be dismissed. Proceed with caution, we must, Yoda concluded. Meditate on this information. I will speak to young Skywalker. I shall, who close to the Chancellor has become. As the meeting adjourned, I sensed that we had planted seeds of awareness that would eventually bear fruit, though perhaps not quickly enough to avert the culmination of the Sith grand plan. Our departure from the temple was subdued, the weight of partial success and partial failure heavy upon us. As we walked the grand corridors, Jorik suddenly stopped, his face pale with realization. The whisper lost in time, he said, echoing the phrase from my vision on Baldemic. It has grown into a storm across eternity. "What do you mean?" I asked, though a chill of recognition spread through me. Plagueis's experiments with midi-chlorians, his attempt to create life directly through the Force, Jorik explained, his voice hushed. The versions he claimed to have initiated. What if he succeeded? The implication struck me with stunning clarity. A being conceived through midi-chlorian manipulation, one who would be exceptionally powerful in the Force, the chosen one of prophecy, Jorik whispered. The one who would bring balance to the Force. The ancient Jedi prophecy had been interpreted as foretelling the destruction of the Sith. But what if that understanding was flawed? What if the balance referenced was not what the Jedi assumed? Anakin Skywalker, I said, the name emerging unbidden, found on Tatooine with the highest midi-chlorian count ever recorded and no father. Conceived of the Force itself according to his mother, Jorik added. But what if that conception was not natural but the result of Plagueis' manipulation from afar? The scope of the Sith plan unfolded before us in all its terrible grandeur. Not merely political manipulation spanning decades, but a scheme to create the very instrument of the Jedi's destruction, a being of unprecedented power who would be trained in their traditions only to ultimately turn against them. If Skywalker is indeed the product of Sith manipulation, I said, and if Palpatine is the Sith apprentice, then the Chancellor's particular interest in Anakin takes on new significance. The puzzle pieces aligned with horrifying precision. Palpatine had consistently shown special attention to Skywalker, cultivating a relationship outside Jedi supervision. If he was indeed a Sith Lord, then this connection represented the final stage of a plan conceived by Plagueis and now being executed by his apprentice. "We must warn the Council immediately," Jorik insisted, turning back toward the chamber we had just left. But even as he spoke, alarms began to sound throughout the temple. Security alerts flashed on communication panels, and Jedi rushed toward the main concourse. Amidst the sudden activity, we intercepted Master Windu striding purposefully toward the temple hangar. "What has happened?" Jorik called out. Windu paused only briefly. "General Grievous has been located on Utapai. Master Kenobi is being dispatched to deal with him, and Chancellor Palpatine has requested that Skywalker be appointed as his personal representative on the Jedi Council." "Master Windu," I said urgently, "regarding our earlier discussion about the Chancellor, I believe the situation may be more immediate than we realized." Windu's expression revealed that our warnings had not fallen on deaf ears. "I have had similar concerns. Rest assured we will deal with this matter definitively once Grievous has been eliminated." As he continued on his way, Jorik and I exchanged troubled glances. Events were accelerating toward some climactic confrontation, the momentum now too great to easily divert. "The dark side clouds everything," Jorik quoted softly. "The future is in constant motion." Around us, the Jedi Temple continued its preparations for what many hoped would be the final chapter of the Clone Wars. None suspected it might instead be the final hours of the Jedi Order itself. The temple was in constant motion following the departure of Master Kenobi for Utapau. Reports filtered in of successes across multiple fronts, suggesting that the tide of the war might finally be turning in the Republic's favor. Yet beneath this apparent progress, Jorik and I sensed a deep current of foreboding, as if the Force itself trembled in anticipation of some momentous shift. We retreated to the archives, compiling our research into a comprehensive report that could stand independent of our presence. If our worst fears proved correct, someone would need to understand the full scope of Plagueis' work and its connection to current events. "The third open loop remains," Jorik observed as we worked. "We have uncovered Plagueis' experiments and their purpose. We have connected his manipulations to the current political situation. But the final mystery, the true nature of his death and the complete identity of his apprentice, remains unresolved." The answer, when it came, arrived with devastating swiftness. As the sun set over Coruscant, casting long shadows through the temple windows, a sudden disturbance rippled through the Force so profoundly that every Jedi in the complex surely felt it. Pain, betrayal, and death emanated from the direction of the Senate District. We rushed to the Temple Communications Center, finding it already crowded with concerned Jedi. The sparse updates painted a grim picture. Master Windu and several council members had gone to confront Chancellor Palpatine, who had been identified as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. Within the hour, the full horror became apparent. Columns of clone troopers marched on the Jedi Temple, led by a figure in dark robes wielding a blue lightsaber with terrible efficiency. Security holocams captured fragments of the assault before being disabled, showing Anakin Skywalker, his eyes burning with yellow hatred, cutting down Jedi without hesitation or mercy. Plagueis creation, Jorik whispered in horror as we watched the footage, turned against the very order that raised him. The temple defenses mobilized swiftly, but confusion reigned. The clone troopers, loyal defenders just hours before, now executed Jedi with mechanical precision. Some spoke of inhibitor chips and contingency orders, but there was no time to understand the betrayal as survival became our only priority. The younglings, I said, the most vulnerable members of our order, foremost in my thoughts. We must get them to safety. We fought our way to the initiate quarters, gathering as many children as we could find. The sounds of battle echoed through the grand corridors, punctuated by the distinctive snap hiss of lightsabers and the staccato report of blaster fire. The temple sanctuary for 1,000 generations had become a killing ground. Leading our group of terrified younglings, we navigated toward a little-used maintenance tunnel that connected to Coruscant's lower levels. Twice we were forced to engage clone troopers, their familiar faces now masks of programmed hostility. Jorik took a blaster bolt to his shoulder, but continued on, his determination unwavering despite the pain. As we approached our escape route, a familiar presence caused us to halt abruptly. Anakin Skywalker, now fully embraced by the dark side, stood at the junction ahead, his lightsaber illuminating his transformed features with an eerie blue glow. "Take the children and go," Jorik said quietly, igniting his lightsaber. "I will hold him as long as I can." There was no time for argument or farewell. I guided the younglings down an alternative passage as the sounds of lightsaber combat erupted behind us. Jorik, wise and gentle scholar, now stood as the final barrier between innocence and annihilation. I felt his passing in the Force minutes later, a brief flare of pain followed by serene acceptance as he became one with the cosmic energy he had studied his entire life. His sacrifice allowed us to reach the maintenance tunnel and descend into the labyrinthine undercity of Coruscant, where clone patrols would be harder to coordinate. The hours that followed passed in a blur of constant movement and vigilance. I led the children through service corridors and abandoned sectors, calling upon old contacts from my research expeditions to provide temporary shelter and transportation. One by one, I found safe placements for the younglings, extracting promises that they would be hidden, their Force sensitivity concealed from the new regime that was rapidly solidifying its control. As dawn broke over a changed galaxy, I stood alone on a decrepit landing platform in Coruscant's industrial sector. The Imperial Declaration had been broadcast continuously through the night, Emperor Palpatine's distorted features proclaiming the birth of a new order rising from the treacherous Jedi rebellion. The pieces of the puzzle finally locked into perfect, terrible alignment. Palpatine was indeed Darth Sidious, apprentice to Plagueis, who had continued his master's grand design with ruthless efficiency. The Clone Wars, the gradual accumulation of emergency powers, the secret creation of a clone army, the cultivation of Anakin Skywalker as an instrument of destruction, all had been elements of a plan spanning decades. And the final irony was perhaps the most bitter. Plagueis, who had sought immortality through mastery of midichlorians, had instead been killed by the apprentice he trained, following the ancient Sith tradition. Yet his legacy continued through that same apprentice who now ruled the galaxy they had conspired to dominate. The experiments with creating and preserving life had served their purpose, not by granting Plagueis personal immortality, but by creating the conditions for the Sith philosophy to achieve its ultimate victory. He had transcended death, not through continued existence, but through the indelible mark left upon galactic history. As I prepared to depart Coruscant with the last of our gathered research, I took one final look at the Jedi Temple in the distance. Now transformed into the Imperial Palace, smoke still rose from sections of the structure, while Imperial banners already hung from its ancient facade. The tale of Darth Plagueis had reached its resolution, though not as either he or the Jedi would have envisioned. The power to create life and cheat death had indeed changed the fate of the galaxy, but through means too convoluted and terrible for anyone to have fully anticipated. The wisdom we had gathered came too late to prevent catastrophe, but perhaps, in time, it might help illuminate a path back from darkness. The Force, ever seeking balance, would not allow the Sith victory to stand unchallenged forever. With that hope, however faint, I turned away from the fallen temple and stepped into the uncertain future of a galaxy transformed by the legacy of Darth Plagueis, the Wise. The stars shine with patient indifference above the small vessel that carries me through the darkness between worlds. Behind lies Coruscant, transformed almost overnight from the shining capital of a republic to the cold heart of an empire. Ahead, uncertainty and exile, yet also the faint ember of hope that refuses to be extinguished. I have sent copies of our research to trusted contacts throughout the galaxy, encoded and hidden within innocent-seeming cultural artifacts. The knowledge we gathered about Plagueis and his apprentice must survive, even if those who compiled it do not. Future generations will need to understand how the Sith accomplished their victory, if they are to avoid similar manipulation. As the hyperdrive hums steadily, I find my thoughts turning from urgent action to deeper reflection. The tale of Darth Plagueis represents more than merely the rise and fall of a powerful Sith Lord. It speaks to fundamental truths about knowledge, ambition, and the eternal cycle of the Force itself. Plagueis sought to transcend the natural order, to bend the fundamental laws of life and death to his will. In pursuing mastery over midichlorians, he believed he could achieve godlike control over existence itself. Yet even as he manipulated life at its most basic level, he remained blind to the simple truth that his apprentice would follow the path of all Sith before him. The stars outside my viewport stretch into the blue lines of hyperspace, their eternal light distorted by velocity, much as Plagueis sought to distort the natural flow of the Force. I am reminded that even the most powerful beings are ultimately part of a greater cosmic pattern, not masters of it. Perhaps there is wisdom in accepting the natural cycle of existence rather than fighting against it. The Jedi, for all their flaws, understood that death was not an ending, but a transformation, a returning of one's energy to the Force that connects all living things. Plagueis rejected this wisdom, seeing death as an enemy to be conquered rather than a transition to be accepted with grace. Now, as the last embers of the Republic fade and the long night of Imperial rule begins, I find curious comfort in the knowledge that this too shall eventually pass. Empires rise and fall, darkness gives way to light, only to be followed again by shadow. The cycle continues, beyond the control of even the most powerful Sith or the most enlightened Jedi. The laboratory on Sojourn lies empty now, its secrets scoured by Imperial agents. The hidden estate on Cato Nemoidia has likely been sealed or destroyed. Yet the legacy of Plagueis's work continues, not in physical locations but in the ripples his actions have sent through the Force itself, disturbances that may take generations to settle. As my ship drifts through the starlit void, I think of the younglings now hidden throughout the galaxy. Children strong in the Force, scattered like seeds that may one day grow into a new generation of light-bearers. Their journey will be difficult, their path unmarked, but the Force will guide them as it has guided countless others before. The ancient Jedi texts speak of balance, not as a static state, but as a dynamic process. Perhaps the rise of the Sith and the fall of the Jedi is but one movement in a cosmic dance that has continued since time immemorial. If so, then the darkness now ascending is not the end, but merely a passage that will eventually yield to dawn. With this thought, I allow myself to relax, my breathing slowing to match the rhythmic hum of the ship's systems. The quest for knowledge that began in the Jedi archives has led through darkness and tragedy to a different kind of wisdom than I had sought. As consciousness begins to fade into peaceful slumber, one final thought forms in my mind. The true immortality that Plagueis sought lies not in endless physical existence, but in becoming part of the eternal force that binds the galaxy together. In this, perhaps, even the darkest Sith Lord may find ultimate redemption. If you have found this journey through the shadows restful and intriguing, I invite you to subscribe and join me for more tales from the distant corners of the galaxy. Until then, may the Force be with you, always.